Carter Vale was already halfway to the car when he saw them. Merrick and Ivy stood at the bottom of the staircase in their puffy jackets, backpack straps tight in their fists, faces turned toward the service hallway. They didn't glance at the front door. They didn't glance at him. They just waited, still as statues, under the chandelier's hard light. "Kids," Carter called, pushing his voice into gentle. "We're late." Nothing. Not even a blink. His driver's engine purred outside. The morning in Los Altos was clear and bright, the kind that usually made him feel untouchable. Today it felt like a spotlight. Carter walked back in, shoes clicking on marble, and followed their gaze. A faint sound drifted from the hallway. Not speech. Not laughter. A low, steady hum, like a song kept inside the throat. The house manager, Leland, appeared with a clipboard. He stopped when he saw Carter's face. "What is this?" Carter asked, keeping his tone flat. "Why are my children lined up like they're boarding a plane?" Leland's eyes flicked to the hallway. "They do that on Tuesdays and Thursdays, sir." Carter's jaw tightened. "Why?" A door opened softly. A woman stepped out with a mop bucket, hair wrapped in a scarf, eyes lowered like she was trying not to take up space. Ivy's fingers loosened on her backpack strap. Merrick's lips parted, almost like he could taste a word. Leland swallowed. "They're waiting for Nola. The maid." Carter stared at the woman like he was seeing a ghost walk through his own house. It shouldn't have mattered. Staff came and went in Carter Vale's world the way black cars did. Quiet, interchangeable, paid well to stay invisible. But the sight of his children waiting hit a place in him that still felt raw. After Camila died, he rebuilt the house like a fortress. New locks. New routines. Cameras in every hallway for safety, he said, as if grief could be stopped by a passcode. The first nanny lasted 9 days. The second lasted 3 weeks. One left a note on the kitchen island. "They looked through me." Carter told himself the problem was hiring. He offered higher pay, better benefits, a therapist on retainer. Nothing worked. Merrick stopped speaking in full sentences. Ivy slept with the closet light on and refused the sunroom where her mother used to read. Carter tried sitting with them, but his phone always buzzed, his mind always ran back to board meetings, places where he could win. So he made a rule. The rule he swore on. No staff member was to comfort the children. No extra time. No gifts. No special bond. Clean, cook, manage, then disappear. The house would stay orderly. Predictable. Safe. It sounded responsible. It sounded like control. That's why Nola Briggs was hired through an agency with strict boundaries and spotless references. A cleaner, not a nanny. 2 days a week. Minimal contact. Yet now his children waited for her like she was the only person who could open a locked door inside them. Carter's stomach tightened. He hadn't paid her to matter. If you've ever tried to protect someone you love by keeping your distance, if you've ever made a rule because you were afraid of losing something again, then you already understand why Carter made his. Sometimes we think control is safety, until someone quietly proves otherwise. Have you ever pushed people away thinking it was for the best? Tell me in the comments. Someone reading might need to know they're not alone. Nola moved through the Vale house like she'd learned how to be quiet on purpose. She didn't drag the vacuum. She lifted it. She didn't slam cabinet doors. She guided them shut with her palm, like even would deserve gentleness. Her eyes stayed low most of the time, not out of fear exactly, more like she was respecting invisible lines she could sense without being told. Carter watched her from the edge of the kitchen, coffee cooling in his hand. She wore plain sneakers and a gray uniform the agency provided, but she'd altered it slightly, hem stitched, collar pressed, sleeves rolled with neat precision. Everything about her said, "I will not be a problem here." and still his children tracked her like weather. Ivy sat on the second stair and followed Nola with her eyes as Nola wiped fingerprints off the banister. Merrick hovered near the hallway, close enough to hear her humming, far enough to pretend he wasn't listening. The sound wasn't a song Carter recognized. It was older than radio. Soft, steady, like a hand on a fevered forehead. Nola didn't address them directly. She didn't say, "Good morning, sweetheart," like the nannies used to. She didn't ask Merrick questions or try to make Ivy smile. She just worked. But she did one strange thing Carter couldn't explain. When she found the children's drawings, crumpled pages shoved under the coffee table or tucked behind couch cushions, she didn't throw them away. She flattened them carefully, smoothed the creases, and placed them in a neat stack beside the living room lamp. Like they mattered. Carter noticed Ivy glance at that stack once, then twice. Her small hand twitched as if she wanted to reach for it. And Nola, without looking up, kept humming like she knew exactly what the silence was asking for. By the third week, Carter realized the strangest thing about Merrick and Ivy wasn't that they were quiet. It was that they didn't ask for anything. Not for water. Not for help with zippers. Not for an extra blanket. They moved around the house like guests afraid of being a burden, even though the house was theirs, even though Carter's name was carved into half the world in glass and steel. Merrick had once been talkative. The kind of kid who narrated his toy battles out loud, who corrected adult words with serious little confidence. After the accident, his voice shrank down to single syllables, then nods, then nothing. He started communicating with his eyes, quick flicks toward what he wanted, then away like wanting was dangerous. Ivy was younger, but her grief had sharp edges. She didn't cry much. She didn't tantrum. She simply refused. Refused the sunroom. Refused her mother's perfume that still sat on the dresser. Refused certain songs on the radio, pressing her palms to her ears like she could push memories back out. Carter tried therapy, story time, weekend trips to Santa Cruz, a new golden retriever that someone promised would bring laughter back. The dog slept at Merrick's door, loyal and confused. The laughter never came. But on Tuesdays and Thursdays, when Nola's hum floated through the hall, something shifted, so small Carter almost didn't trust it. Ivy's shoulders loosened. Merrick stood closer. Neither spoke, but they stayed. Like they were waiting for a moment they didn't have the language to request. And Carter, watching from behind his own careful distance, felt a fear he couldn't name. Because whatever Nola was doing, it was working. And he didn't know why. The first real change didn't announce itself. It slipped in quietly the way grief had. Carter noticed it at dinner. The plates were set. The food was warm. Everything was perfect in the way perfection usually was in his house. Yet Merrick pushed peas into a corner of his plate and stopped. Ivy picked at her chicken, eyes flicking toward the hallway every few seconds. "Eat," Carter said, trying not to sound like he was asking. They didn't. Minutes passed. The silence stretched. Carter felt irritation rise, then something colder underneath it. He followed Ivy's gaze. "Nola's already gone for the day," the house manager said gently. "She left 20 minutes ago." Ivy's fork froze midair. Merrick slid his plate back, slow and deliberate, like the decision had been made long before the food arrived. "They do this sometimes," Leland added. "Only on the days she's here." Carter stared at his children. "You're not hungry?" No answer. That night, Carter reviewed the schedule. Tuesdays. Thursdays. Always the same. On the days Nola cleaned, the children ate later. Not because she fed them, she never did, but because they waited until she passed through the dining room on her way out. He tested it the next week. On Thursday he delayed dinner. Nola finished mopping the kitchen floor and paused at the doorway, bucket in hand. She nodded politely at the children, said nothing, and left. Only then did Ivy lift her fork. Only then did Merrick take his first bite. Carter sat there, stunned, watching his children eat in silence, realizing something had shifted without permission. They weren't waiting for food. They were waiting for her to exist in the room first. Carter started hearing the humming before he saw Nola. It floated through the house like a signal, low, steady, never loud enough to demand attention. It wasn't cheerful. It wasn't sad. It just was. A sound that didn't ask anything of you. The first time Ivy reacted, it was barely noticeable. She was curled on the couch with her knees to her chest when the humming drifted in from the laundry room. Her shoulders dropped. Just a fraction. Like she'd been holding her breath and finally remembered how to let it go. Merrick followed the sound the way a compass needle follows north. He stood in the hallway pretending to inspect a framed photo, his body angled toward the hum. Nola never acknowledged them. She didn't turn when Merrick hovered. Didn't smile when Ivy peeked around the corner. She simply folded clothes with careful hands, humming like the sound belonged to the work itself. Carter watched from the stairs, uneasy. It wasn't the melody that bothered him. It was the familiarity of it. The way the house responded, like it recognized something it had been missing. One afternoon, Ivy did something she hadn't done in months. She sat on the floor. Not tucked against furniture. Not guarding her back. Just sat. Nola passed by with a basket of towels. Their eyes met for half a second. No words. No gestures. The humming continued. That night, Carter lay awake replaying the sound in his head, realizing with a tightness in his chest that it wasn't comforting because it was joyful. It was comforting because it expected nothing in return. And somehow his children trusted that more than anything else he'd tried. Carter told himself he was checking the cameras for routine reasons. That was the lie he used when he opened the security app late one night. The house quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant whir of the HVAC system. He'd reviewed footage countless times before. Staff schedules, deliveries, entrances and exits. Control had become a habit. He scrolled to Tuesday afternoon. Laundry room. Hallway. Living room. There was Nola, moving exactly how he remembered. Quiet. Efficient. Invisible. At first he felt vindicated. She didn't linger near the children. She didn't kneel to their level or reach for their hands. She didn't break a single rule. Then he noticed what she did instead. In the living room, Ivy's coloring pages lay scattered under the coffee table. Nola paused, glanced toward the hallway where the children sat, and slowly crouched down. She smoothed each page with the flat of her palm, pressing out the wrinkles as if they were important documents. She stacked them neatly beside the lamp, perfectly aligned. In the hallway footage, Merrick stood near the wall, pretending to study a photo. Nola passed him with a basket of laundry and adjusted her path, barely an inch, to avoid brushing against him. Not avoidance. Consideration. Carter scrubbed a hand over his face. The footage jumped ahead. Kitchen. Nola washed a mug, dried it, and placed it upside down on a towel. Then, almost as an afterthought, she straightened a small chair at the table. Merrick's chair. She never looked at the camera. Never looked for approval. She just moved through the house like someone who understood fragile things. Carter closed the app with a sharp breath. There was no misconduct. No violation he could point to. Only a growing realization that something quiet and deliberate was happening right under his rules. And that whatever it was, he hadn't hired it, but his children had found it anyway. The shoes appeared on Ivy's bed without announcement. Carter noticed them when he went to say goodnight. Small sneakers, clean and neatly paired, their faded pink laces tied into careful bows. They sat on the quilt like an offering. Ivy stood frozen in the doorway, eyes locked on them. Those shoes hadn't been worn in nearly a year. Ivy had kicked them off in the hospital parking lot after the accident and refused to touch them again. Carter had tried to throw them away once. Ivy screamed so hard she vomited. "No one was supposed to move those," Carter said, his voice tight. Leland cleared his throat. "Nola found them in the laundry room, covered in dust." Carter felt anger flare, sharp, immediate. Why would she? He stopped. Ivy stepped forward. She crossed the room slowly, like the floor might vanish under her feet. She touched one shoe with 2 fingers. Then she sat on the bed and pulled it onto her foot. Just one. Her breath hitched. Not a cry, not a sob, but something dangerously close. She pressed her heel down, eyes squeezed shut, and stayed like that. Carter didn't move. Neither did Ivy. From the hallway, a faint hum drifted in. Nola passing by. Working. Not watching. Ivy opened her eyes and looked up at her father. For the first time since the accident, she didn't look afraid. She looked like she had remembered something. Carter backed out of the room quietly, heart pounding, realizing the truth settling in his chest. Nola hadn't cleaned the shoes. She'd returned them. And his daughter had been waiting for that moment longer than he knew. Night settled over the house without ceremony. Carter was halfway down the hallway when he heard it. She forgot her scarf. The words were small, careful, almost afraid to exist. Carter stopped so suddenly his shoulder brushed the wall. For a moment he wondered if exhaustion had finally started playing tricks on him. The house had been silent for months in a way that trained your ears to imagine things. "Merrick?" he said quietly. No answer. Carter took another step. The light from the hallway lamp spilled into the living room, where Merrick stood alone near the coat rack. His hands were folded together, fingers worrying at each other. "She forgot her scarf," Merrick said again, louder this time, pointing at the hook by the door. A thin gray scarf hung there. Nola's. Carter's chest tightened. Who forgot it? Merrick hesitated. His mouth opened, closed. Then he swallowed. Nola. The name landed like something fragile dropped on tile. Carter knelt slowly, afraid a sudden movement might shatter the moment. "You talked," he said, not trusting his voice to hold anything more. Merrick nodded once. His eyes stayed on the scarf, not his father. "She hums when it rains," he added, as if explaining something important. "She does it quieter." Carter felt tears burn behind his eyes. He hadn't heard his son form a sentence in almost a year. "I'll make sure she gets it back," Carter said. Merrick considered that. Then he reached up, lifted the scarf from the hook and held it to his chest. "Tomorrow," he said. Carter stood there long after Merrick padded back to his room, staring at the empty hook. The house felt different now, like it had just spoken back. He understood, finally, that waiting could be louder than grief itself inside this house. Carter didn't sleep. Every sound felt amplified, the settling walls, the ticking clock, the faint echo of that humming replaying in his head. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, realizing something he didn't want to admit. He was afraid. Not of Nola. Not of rules breaking or boundaries blurring. He was afraid of hope. Hope was what ruined him the first time. Hope was believing his wife would recover. Hope was promising the children everything would be okay while knowing he had no proof. By morning, his fear hardened into resolve. He summoned Leland and reviewed contracts, liability clauses, exit procedures. He told himself he was being responsible. If Nola was becoming important, then she was becoming dangerous. People who mattered could leave. People who mattered could die. At breakfast, Merrick said nothing, but he placed the folded scarf beside his plate. Ivy watched it like it might disappear if she blinked. Carter's chest ached. When Nola arrived that afternoon, she paused at the doorway, surprised to see the children already waiting. She took in the scarf on the table and froze. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't mean to forget it." Merrick pushed the scarf toward her. "For tomorrow," he said. Nola's eyes shone, but she didn't cry. She simply nodded, accepting the offering like something sacred. Carter watched from the hall, hands clenched. This couldn't continue. Because the more the children leaned toward her, the more he felt the old terror returning. And Carter Vale wasn't sure he could survive losing something this fragile twice. The rule he built was cracking and he could hear it. Carter waited for the right moment to ask her. He told himself timing mattered, that a careless question could undo whatever fragile balance had formed. So he watched instead. Sirens wailed outside one afternoon, distant but sharp, slicing through the quiet. Nola's hands stilled on the counter. Just for a beat. She lowered her head and breathed once, slow and controlled, then kept wiping like nothing had happened. Carter saw it. Ivy saw it too. The girl slid closer to the hallway wall, fingers pressed to her ears, eyes wide. Nola shifted her body without looking, placing herself between Ivy and the sound. No touch. No words. Just presence. Later in the kitchen, Carter poured coffee he didn't want. "You've worked in houses like this before?" he asked, keeping his tone neutral. Nola nodded. "Some. Children." Another pause. Shorter this time. "Yes, sir." He felt the question rising. "Why do they wait for you? Why does my son speak your name?" But it lodged in his throat. He noticed the way she kept her gaze level with the counter, the way her shoulders stayed braced, like she was prepared for something to fall. "I appreciate your professionalism," Carter said instead. Nola met his eyes for the first time that day. There was gratitude there. And something else. A warning maybe. That night, Carter stood outside the children's rooms listening to the quiet. He realized the question he was avoiding wasn't about Nola at all. It was about how much grief a person could carry and still show up gently for someone else. Carter followed her on a Thursday. He hated himself for it the moment he turned the wheel. This wasn't caution. It was intrusion dressed up as concern. Still, he kept a careful distance as Nola's bus rolled south, past glass offices and into streets where the sidewalks cracked and the houses leaned into one another. She got off near East Palo Alto. Carter parked a block away and watched her walk with steady purpose, grocery bags swinging lightly at her side. She didn't check her phone. She didn't rush. She moved like someone who knew exactly where she was going and why. Her building was small and tired, paint peeling, hallway lights flickering. Carter stayed in the car, heart thudding, telling himself this was enough. Then he saw the door. A photograph was taped at eye level, protected by clear plastic. A boy, maybe 8 or 9, smiling wide with a missing front tooth. His hair curled the same way Merrick's did when it got too long. His eyes held the same careful seriousness. Carter's breath caught. The name written beneath the photo made his chest tighten. Same accident. Same highway. Same date. Nola unlocked the door and disappeared inside, leaving the image staring back at him. Carter sat there until the sun dipped low, until the streetlights buzzed on, until the truth settled heavy and undeniable. This wasn't coincidence. It was gravity. The children hadn't chosen her by chance. They'd recognized something familiar in her silence, something broken the same way theirs was. Carter drove home slowly, hands shaking on the wheel, knowing the house would never feel neutral again. Whatever he did next would change all of them. And for the first time he understood that control would not save them, only shared truth might eventually together all. Carter didn't mention what he'd seen. Not at breakfast. Not when Nola arrived later that afternoon with her scarf tucked carefully into her bag. He watched her move through the house, every gesture suddenly sharpened by the knowledge he carried. The photograph stayed with him. The boy's smile. the date written beneath it. The way grief had folded itself into Nola so neatly it almost looked like discipline. That evening, Carter found her in the laundry room, folding towels with quiet precision. The hum was there, softer than usual. "My children," Carter said, and the sound of his own voice startled him, "lost their mother on Highway 101. Nola's hand stopped. The hum died in her throat. "I know," she said after a moment. Carter swallowed. "You know?" She folded the towel anyway. "What? Twice. Perfect edges." The news ran the story for weeks. High-profile accident. I remembered the date. Silence filled the room, heavy but not hostile. "My son was on that road too," she said, not looking at him. "Different car. Same morning." Carter felt the air leave his lungs. "I saw the picture." Nola closed her eyes. "Just briefly. Then you followed me." "Yes." She nodded, accepting the truth without drama. People usually do once they start asking why. "Why them?" Carter asked. "Why my children?" Nola finally met his gaze. Her eyes held no accusation, only exhaustion layered over care. "Because they don't ask me to fix anything," she said. "They just let me be near them." Carter leaned against the washing machine, the weight of it all pressing down. For the first time since the accident, he understood something vital. Grief had found them all. But it had found her first. They didn't talk much after that. They didn't need to. Carter sat at the kitchen table while Nola finished her work, the children nearby, existing in the same room like it was finally safe to do so. No explanations. No apologies. Just the quiet acknowledgement of shared loss. "I'm not trying to replace anyone," Nola said eventually, her voice steady but careful. "I wouldn't know how." "I know," Carter replied. Merrick sat on the floor with his back against the couch, drawing. Ivy leaned against the armrest, watching Nola like she was memorizing her shape. "They don't need replacing," Carter said. "They need witnesses." Nola nodded slowly. "So did my son." The hum returned, barely audible now, threaded through the silence like stitching. Carter noticed how it didn't fill the room, it softened the edges of it. "I never meant to stay long," Nola said. "Just enough to pay bills. Keep moving." "And now?" Carter asked. She glanced at the children. Merrick looked up briefly, met her eyes, then went back to drawing. "Now I wait," she said. That word landed differently in Carter's chest. Waiting wasn't weakness. It wasn't avoidance. It was what you did when something fragile needed time to unfold. Carter realized then that whatever came next, fear, change, pain, it would be shaped by truth, not rules. And in that shared silence, something steadier than control began to form. On Tuesday morning the house waited. Carter noticed it the moment he stepped into the foyer. Merrick stood by the staircase, jacket on. Ivy sat on the bottom step, shoes laced but untouched, hands folded in her lap. Their eyes kept drifting to the service hallway. "Nola will be here soon," Carter said, though he hadn't checked the time. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The house manager's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then at Carter. "She called in sick," he said quietly. "Just for today." Ivy's shoulders tightened. Merrick didn't move at all. At breakfast the food went untouched. The scarf stayed folded between the plates like a promise that couldn't be redeemed. By mid-morning, Ivy refused to leave the living room. By noon, Merrick retreated into his closet, pulling the door shut with deliberate finality. Carter felt panic rise, sharp and helpless. This was what he'd feared. Not attachment, but collapse. By afternoon, Ivy was crying in a way Carter hadn't heard since the hospital. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just small, broken sounds that seemed to come from somewhere deep and tired. Carter knelt in front of her, hands useless. "She'll come back," he said, but the words felt thin even to him. "She hums," Ivy whispered. "When it's quiet." Carter's chest broke open. He realized then that Nola hadn't filled a role. She'd become a landmark. A point the children oriented themselves around when the world felt too large and unpredictable. By evening, Carter made the call. Not to the agency. To Nola. He left a message he'd never planned to say aloud. "They're waiting," he said. "And so am I." Nola returned on Thursday. Not with fanfare. Not with explanations. She arrived carrying her bag, eyes tired but steady, as if she'd weighed the cost of coming back and decided it was worth it. The children were already at the stairs. Ivy stood first. Merrick followed. Nola paused when she saw them, breath catching just slightly. She set her bag down and knelt, not to hug them, not to touch, but to be level with them. "I'm here," she said simply. Merrick nodded. Ivy exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for days. Carter watched from the doorway, the final decision settling in his chest. Later that afternoon, he sat across from Nola at the kitchen table. No contracts. No legal language. Just honesty. "I can't pretend this is just cleaning anymore," he said. Nola folded her hands. "I wouldn't ask you to." "I don't want them to lose you," Carter continued. "But I won't trap you here either." Nola considered that. "I don't want to be what they cling to," she said softly. "I want to be what helps them stand." Carter nodded. "Then we do this carefully. Together." It wasn't a promotion. It wasn't a title. It was an agreement built on truth instead of fear. As Nola rose to return to work, the hum returned, quiet, grounding, present. And Carter Vale understood something he'd been avoiding since the accident. Letting someone matter wasn't the danger. Refusing to was. The change didn't come with paperwork. No announcement was made. No meeting scheduled. The house simply adjusted, like a body finding a new way to stand after an injury. Nola still cleaned. The floors shone. The counters stayed clear. But now she was also allowed to exist fully in the same rooms as the children. Not as a replacement. Not as a solution. Just as a steady presence. Some days, Ivy sat at the kitchen table while Nola folded laundry nearby, tracing shapes in the condensation of her water glass. Some days, Merrick followed the hum from room to room, always a few steps behind, never crowding. Carter watched it all with a careful eye. He noticed how Nola never rushed the children. Never filled their silences with reassurance. She let moments finish themselves. She understood that grief didn't need correcting, it needed space. One afternoon, Merrick did something small and monumental. He handed Nola one of his drawings. It wasn't elaborate. Just 3 stick figures under a crooked sun. One taller. 2 smaller. No faces. Nola took it like it was fragile. "Thank you," she said. That was all. Later, Carter found the drawing placed beside the stack near the lamp, smoothed and protected. It joined the others, no longer hidden, no longer discarded. Carter felt something loosen in his chest. Nola hadn't cleaned the house into order. She'd made room for the mess that mattered. And in doing so, she'd changed what meant to clean actually meant inside those walls. The children still waited. But it looked different now. They didn't line up by the stairs with stiff shoulders and anxious eyes. They sprawled on the rug. They sat on the steps mid-laugh, jackets half on, half forgotten. Waiting became something soft instead of rigid. One morning, as rain tapped gently against the windows, Merrick spoke again. "It smells like her tea," he said, nose wrinkling. Carter smiled without thinking. "Does it?" Merrick nodded. "Chamomile." Ivy giggled. A real giggle, surprised by itself. Nola hummed from the kitchen, the sound threading through the house like memory turned gentle. Carter stood there, watching the three of them exist in the same space, and felt something he hadn't allowed himself in a long time. Relief. The house no longer felt like a monument to loss. It felt lived in. It felt patient. Later that day, Carter found the scarf hanging back on the hook by the door. Not forgotten this time. Just placed there ready. Nola was never meant to stay forever. They all knew that. But she had stayed long enough to teach the children how to wait without fear, and Carter how to stop running from what mattered. As evening settled over Los Altos, the house grew quiet in a new way. Not empty. Felt. And for the first time since the accident, Carter understood that healing didn't arrive all at once. Sometimes it simply knocked, softly, and waited to be let in. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of someone who showed up quietly when you needed them most, or if it made you think about the people you're still waiting for, please take a moment to like this video. It helps stories like this reach others who may need them. Subscribe to the channel if you want more quiet, human stories about love, loss, and the moments that change us. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment and share what part of this story touched you. Sometimes, the simplest connections matter more than we realize.